This is the story of PSA, the grading giant that transformed from a trusted cornerstone of the hobby to becoming a one-stop shop monopoly. What started as a service built to bring legitimacy and consistency to trading cards has now become a lightning rod for controversy and community frustration. In this video, we're diving deep into PSA's recent moves, their controversies, and their rising challengers that want a piece of the crown. By the end, you'll see why there's whispers of people leaving PSA and what it means for the future of our hobby. Let's get into it. For years, PSA has been the gold standard for card grading, but lately, collectors are sensing that something's off with PSA. The company has made some hush-hush changes, like partnering with eBay on a new program and toughening up their grading standards. And not everyone's happy about it. To understand PSA's situation, we have to remember how exactly they became number one. PSA has graded some of the most iconic Pokemon cards in existence. For a long time, if you wanted top dollar for your card, PSA's label was the key. They built trust with consistent grades, were easy to sell, and are the most well-known. They essentially made the graded card market for Pokemon. During the pandemic-fueled Pokemon mania, PSA's business exploded. Reports show PSA graded over 13 million cards in 2023 alone. Roughly 78% of the entire grading market. PSA was on top of the world, but heavy is the head that wears the crown. So what changed? First, PSA angered a lot of customers with huge backlogs and slow turnaround times. Many collectors felt PSA chased profits and huge submission volumes at the cost of customer experience. It got so bad that PSA stopped accepting new bulk submissions for months, and people started exploring alternatives out of sheer frustration. Then there's PSA's strictness and consistency, or some say inconsistency. For years, collectors said that PSA's grading standards were getting tougher. You might have heard the debate of the old PSA cert versus new cert come up recently. Cards being graded recently are being held to a stricter standard than those graded years ago. But now there's concrete evidence that PSA is quietly tightening its grading standards. How? By changing the centering requirements for PSA Gem Mint 10. PSA updated the definition of a PSA 10 on their website. The old standards said a card could be slightly off-center, up to 60-40, for a Gem Mint 10. That's a subtle change with a big impact. That means some cards that used to squeak by as 10s will now be dinged down to 9s purely for centering. Collectors discovered this change in early 2024. PSA effectively raised the bar for perfection. That would mean that prices for a PSA 10 would be more now, right? Well, in reality, it has just made a weird dynamic for older PSA 10s versus newer PSA 10s. Do the older ones graded under looser setting rules become inferior? Some high-end collectors are already saying they prefer the newer cert PSA 10s for that reason. They believe those are the strongest, most flawless PSA 10s. Others argue a 10 is a 10, period. No one stays at the top without getting a few scratches on their reputation. PSA has had its share of controversies. For example, grading fake first edition stamps on cards. And in one infamous case, a PSA 10 first edition base Charizard was discovered to have been trimmed before grading. It's not common, but it happens. Even with some relatively new PSA certs in recent years, each time a mistake like this comes to light, it chips away at trust PSA has built. So combining stricter grading with these past goofs, and you get some collectors feeling a little uneasy. Comments like PSA only cares about profits or PSA grades are inconsistent have become way more common. PSA is slowly becoming the imperfect grader. Though PSA isn't just sitting on their hands. They've made some major moves to strengthen their position. One huge development, PSA partnered with eBay in 2023 for an integrated grading service and a series of other deals. The highlight is a service where you can buy a raw card on eBay and send it directly to PSA for grading, all in one smooth process. In fact, eBay has already been using PSAs for their authenticity guarantee on trading cards. If you buy a raw card over a certain value on eBay, it gets shipped to PSA first to verify it's legit before reaching you. And now, with a new partnership, you might be able to have PSA grade your card, then list it for sale immediately on eBay. It's a one-stop shop. Find a card, authenticate, grade, store, and sell, with eBay and PSA handling every step. These moves suggest PSA is doubling down on being the ultimate one-stop platform for collectors. Grade with us, store with us, buy, sell through our channels. If you're a fan of efficiency, it's promising. However, some collectors see this as a bad thing, with PSA becoming even more of a monopoly, with eBay in cahoots. It most likely will become harder for smaller grading companies to compete for new customers. And anytime one company controls so much, people worry about fees and biases, which is concerning. But overall, PSA is making sure to secure its throne. While PSA is still the giant, there are other grading companies fighting for a bigger slice of the pie, and PSA's perceived stumbles are their opportunities. Let's talk about the main contenders: BGS, CGC, and a bit about newcomers. If you collected cards in the 2000s, you know Beckett, famous for their magazine price guides and their grading with those half-point subgrades. For a long time, BGS was considered PSA's only real rival, especially for sports cards and high-end Pokemon. They offered something PSA didn't, the exclusive Black Label 10, meaning a perfect 10 in every subgrade, essentially a flawless card, often selling for astronomically more than a PSA 10. However, Beckett has really struggled in recent years. In 2023, Beckett made a controversial attempt to change their grading scale, and it backfired spectacularly. They announced that some 9.5s would be changed to Gem Mint 10s, but the hobby outrage was immediate, and the backlash was so bad that Beckett reversed the decision within days. And it was a PR mess that made BGS look indecisive and out of touch. Now let's look at CGC, the newcomer to the grading market, but they're actually an old pro in collectibles. CGC launched their Pokemon card grading service in 2020 during the big boom, and they made a splash by offering fast turnarounds and cheaper prices. A lot of Pokemon collectors gave CGC a try, especially when PSA's doors were closed due to backlog. In just a few years, CGC grabbed roughly 12% of the grading market. Their rise was basically at the expense of Beckett and other smaller companies. People loved the CGC turnaround time, and some felt CGC graders were more consistent and strict. However, CGC has had its own controversies. This shows that the grading game is not easy for anyone. One huge scandal in the Pokemon world revolved around fake prototype cards. Collectors discovered that many so-called vintage Pokemon test cards were actually counterfeits printed much more recently. And guess what? A bunch of these fakes were graded and authenticated by CGC. This meant CGC's experts were initially fooled by the forgeries, slabbed them as if they were legit rare items. It was a huge black eye for CGC. The community was buzzing with outrage that millions of dollars worth of these fake vintage cards had infiltrated the market. To CGC's credit, once the evidence was clear, they did investigate and eventually confirmed the test prints were indeed fake and issued alerts to warn collectors. But by then, the damage was already done. It gave the impression that CGC might be rushing or not doing thorough checks in their quest to gain market share. So while CGC is gaining popularity, especially in the Pokemon community, it still has some growing pains. Then there's the newcomers like TAG and AGS, who market themselves as AI grading, using computers and algorithms to grade cards with extreme consistency. TAG in particular has been hyped for its detailed grading reports and high-tech approach. They give a cool report with all the flaws mapped out. Some collectors were excited by the idea of robots grading their cards without bias. But so far, these companies are tiny players. AI grading might be the future, but the current AI can still miss obvious flaws. It's hard to break into an industry where value is based on reputation. If buyers don't trust or desire a tag slab, it won't catch on. Still, it's worth noting, PSA itself has invested in AI and imaging technology to help automate grading. So even the king is trying to keep up behind the scenes. All this competition has a silver lining for us collectors. Grading companies are pressured to improve. That's because smaller companies are snipping at the heels of PSA. We have an ongoing grading war. Even though PSA is winning, the battle has sparked competition. So here's the big question. Is PSA still going to be the king in the future, or will they be overtaken? They weathered the storm of the backlogs and came out still number one. One could argue PSA anticipated the stricter grading demand and implemented it proactively, which in the long run could increase confidence in PSA 10s, not reduce it. If PSA becomes truly synonymous with perfection, that could reinforce PSA's prestige. But even empires fall if they alienate the populace. PSA has to be careful. The grading hobby is ultimately built on trust and the collector community. If enough collectors believe PSA isn't fair or is too money hungry, they will take their business elsewhere. We've seen how quickly opinions can shift. Beckett was a solid second place, but is now a distant third. Could CGC or another player chip away at PSA over the next decade? It's possible, but not easy. CGC would consistently need to match PSA's quality and somehow elevate their secondary market price to convince big spenders their investment is worthwhile. That might require more time, aggressive marketing, or a black swan event. Right now, PSA is not sitting idle. They're making those big moves we discussed. So the near-term outlook is PSA remains dominant, but the aura of invincibility is gone. They have rivals nipping at them, vocal critics in the community, and the need to consistently prove that a PSA slab is worth it. Grading has evolved from a one-company show to a dynamic marketplace. For us card enthusiasts, this drama has its benefits. Competition can lead to better quality and service. Already we're seeing improvements like Beckett rethinking its strategy. In the end, talk of the downfall of PSA might be a bit of a reach. PSA is still the grading giant of today, but there's no doubt that the card grading landscape is shifting. PSA is facing stronger headwinds than ever. They must satisfy increasingly picky collectors, avoid big mistakes, and fend off hungry competitors all at the same time. They're tightening up on grading standards and teaming up with behemoths like eBay to stay on top. These moves show that PSA is trying to adapt and address our concerns. But only time will tell if it's enough as these companies navigate their challenges. Let's hope that the result is a safer, more transparent, and at the end of the day, more fun hobby. The king of grading might or might not fall. But either way, the collectors will decide who wears the crown in the future. And I want to hear y'all's thoughts in the comments below about what you think about each company and how you think the future will unravel. And if you found this deep dive helpful and want to stay ahead in the collecting game, hit that subscribe button. I would appreciate it greatly. There's always more to uncover, so make sure you don't miss a video. Alright, I'll see y'all later.